Sicily, May 24, 1958. As afternoon fell, the bell of the church of Santa Lucia struck 6 slow chimes, and each one seemed to strike the city's bones. The shadows stretched along Via del Porto, where fishermen collected nets and memories. In the distance, a radio screeched a Spanish bolero, blending in with the voices in the dialect. It was a Sicily that carried the salt of the sea and the silence of Pax. Vittorio Caravetta, in a light suit, open jacket and collar without a tie, got out of a Lancia Aurelia. It didn't seem rushed, but everything about it was calculation. Son of Don Ernesto, he had succeeded his father in running part of the citrus trade and the shadows that protected him. Elegance was armor, hair combed back, eyes that rarely blinked. In the inside pocket, a small, old photograph, his mother who died before he turned 10. In his other pocket, a worn rosary, an inheritance from a priest who had unsuccessfully taught him to trust saints more than blades. The Caravetta family maintained a tense peace with the Rinaldi, lords of other roots and favors. The truce, mediated by mayors and promises, had rested for 2 winters, but spring had brought harvests and rumors. At Casa Bianca, the Caravettas' white and sober property, among orange trees and high walls, the women cooked thick sauces and an ancestral prudence. In the kitchen, Aunt Carmela said that the oil only shines when the pan is hot and the tongue is cold. Never respond with fire, Vittorio. He smiled with a reverence that was both gratitude and guilt. That night there would be a charity ball at the Teatro Politeama in Palermo. The city wore its best French to forget its worst Italians, politicians, industrialists, military, and among them, men who ruled without a mandate. Vittorio didn't like salons. He preferred conversations on the terrace where the wind could carry away dangerous words, but he decided to attend. News reported that the Rinaldis would send their most shining jewel. Their youngest daughter, Lucia Rinaldi, recently arrived from Rome, where she had studied literature and learned to speak with less R and more prudence. They said she was beautiful. They said she was brave. They said she was promised to a banker in Milan. Vittorio climbed the theatre stairs with steps that didn't leave an echo. Inside, chandeliers in tears, burgundy curtains, murmurs in gold. An orchestra was tuning, bows brushing strings as if the air were woven. He leaned against the balustrade of the mezzanine, from where he could see the stage and above all the entrances. Don Ernesto had taught him to watch doors. Nobody kills you where they can't enter. It was then that he saw her. Lucia was in a petrol blue dress, a fabric that resembled the surface of the sea at dusk. The hair tied in a bun with discreet hairpins, the neck bare, like an oath. He carried a modest fan, not to provoke, but to breathe. Beside her, her brother Salvatore, easy smile and hard fists. Lucia raised her eyes as if thanking the ceiling for not falling, and rested them on Vittorio. There was no surprise, no fear, just the recognition that destiny sometimes arrives at the right time and with the wrong person. From the stage, a presenter talked about donations. From the balconies, owners smiled with teeth that knew secrets. The conductor raised his baton. The music started, and beneath the veneer of the ball, the tectonic plates of 2 families creaked again. Vittorio took a deep breath. The scent of jasmine from the garden invaded the lobby like a warning. Beauty can suffocate. There was no formal presentation. There was, first, one circumstance. A lady dropped her purse in the middle of the hallway, coins rolling out like little moons. Vittorio bent down to collect them. Lucia was already doing it on the other side, fingers touching the same coin. Skin met skin with the modesty of 2 culprits. He looked up first. She then acts as someone who measures the danger. "Madam." Vittorio held out the bag, but his eyes were fixed on Lucia. "Thank you," said the girl, returning the coin to the worn leather. The lady thanked him and left. That left the 2 and a possible formality. Caravetta. He inclined his head, dismissing the unspoken title. Rinaldi. She smiled toothlessly, as if that could minimize her last name. Lucia. The hallway was drafty, and the fabric of her dress fluttered a little, revealing that Lucia was made for windy days. Vittorio felt that slight shiver that doctors cannot explain and poets call an omen. He didn't ask for her hand to dance. He simply walked alongside her to the living room, a distance of 2 feet and an entire story. In the hall they danced. Tall men with square shoulders led small women who pretended to give way. The orchestra played an unlikely tango. Palermo has always liked what comes by ship. Vittorio and Lucia approached the ledge where the windows showed a sliver of the sea. "Don't dance," she asked without looking directly. "Just when I can't run away." He placed his fingers on the cold marble. "Run away from what?" "From me." She held back a short laugh. "Music just for them." "I like books," said Lucia almost in a whisper, "because in them destiny can be rewritten." "In my books," he replied, "destiny is already signed." Silence. The orchestra changed tempo. The chandelier's luminous glyphs would be the envy of a summer sky. Lucia opened and closed her fan, not out of nervousness, but to mark what she wouldn't say. Vittorio measured the exits, her brother, the shadows. The distance between his hands looked like a map of a peninsula. Beautiful, but surrounded by sea. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Caravetta." Lucia leaned forward, ready to walk away. "There's no need to run away," he said, and surprised himself by his honesty. She looked at him, seriously, as if observing a wound she had never seen and yet recognized. "I never run away. I just choose where I walk." And walked. The perfume remained, reminding us that certain presences have the talent to continue when they are gone. Vittorio resisted the urge to follow her. He had learned from his father that the first rule of men who command is not to show that they want. But at that moment, he realized that power has its secret humiliation, that of desiring what you cannot control. The next morning dawned with fishermen shouting prices and priests asking for silence. Vittorio, late for a meeting with exporters, took the car through narrow streets to the Signora Bertoia bookstore. He had told himself that he needed an atlas of sea routes. "The truth is that I was looking for something else or someone." Lucia was there, of course. Behind the counter he catalogued used volumes, making notes in soft pencil. No jewelry, no brothers. Simple. Vittorio feigned interest in a tome by D'Annunzio. Lucia pretended not to notice his pretense until it was no longer possible. "You're back." She closed the book carefully. "I also buy books." Vittorio smiled lightly. "Sometimes I read, and sometimes it rewrites itself." "Do you really believe that?" "Believing is a form of disobedience." He sat back, making it clear he was in no rush. The doorbell rang. A young man came in and greeted Lucia very naturally. Excessive naturalness is a warning. Vittorio recognized the brand of coat, Salvatore Rinaldi Men's. The boy browsed the shelves, bought nothing, and left. It was a message. "Does your brother prefer detective novels?" Vittorio ventured. "My brother prefers that I don't read men. I can recommend authors." He held the provocation with a half-smile. Lucia lifted her chin, the posture of someone who had already lost fights she didn't choose. "I am not a war, Mr. Caravetta. Neither do I have a victory. Dialogue could be a game if it weren't a border. On the other side, reputations, laws, family, crime, religion, the entire city could fit between those two people, and the moment a touch would be a scandal." Vittorio bought the wrong book on purpose, and like someone giving in to superstition, left extra notes and a short note. "The maps are always wrong. I'll meet you at the pier at dusk." Lucia did. Not appear at dusk. But 2 days later, when the grey light spilled over the stones, she appeared, her steps agile and her posture calm. "I didn't wear blue." She wore a beige cotton dress, thin belt and loose hair. He looked at the sea as if asking permission from the horizon, and only then did he face Vittorio. "I didn't bring bodyguards today." He tried a light tone. Today brought courage. They walked side by side without touching, creating an almost embrace with the shadows on the sidewalk. They talked about smaller things, the trains, the price of sardines, the eternal renovation of the bridge. And among these small things, the big matter spilled out. "If anyone sees us," she said, "I'll become a rumor, and you, weakness. I was once worse than a rumor, and I was once stronger than I looked." They stopped in front of the closed warehouse. The cold iron of the door seemed like a warning. Vittorio held back the urge to touch her, chose honesty. "I shouldn't be here, Lucia." "Me either," she smiled without apologizing. It was in this exact territory, between what you should and what you want, that love was born. Not with kisses, but with a silent agreement. To see each other again, always in windy places. At dawn, in the empty church. At noon, in a noisy market. At twilight, by the sea. They said little and said a lot. One day, she took a notebook. He, a bundle of old letters from his father. Lucia showed a poem she wrote for when I get old and forget who I was. Vittorio, a photograph of his mother smiling at the sun. They saw in each other not the danger, but the promise of being something else that the world did not allow. But the world has eyes. A sacristan noticed the same woman twice at different times. A neighbor saw the same car for 3 days on streets that were not through, and Salvatore, who confused zeal with possession, began to prowl. Love, which had the delicacy from being born without noise, I would start to live on whispers. The first foray was civil, invitations that were subpoenas, dinners that were interrogations. Lucia realized that between the lines, the whole city was asking her who she was hanging out with. A lady commented, as if talking about rain, "I heard that the Black Lancia is always around here." Lucia responded with the silence of women who have already learned that words can become rope. At Casabianca, Don Ernesto coughed more and gave less advice. The old man knew that his son had the look of someone who had begun to lose something he never had. Aunt Carmela, upon noticing the way Vittorio was holding a cup, always on the same side, like someone with a blind spot, understood that there was a woman. "Be it a fire that warms, not a flame that denounces," he said, putting bread on the table. The official antagonist soon arrived on the scene. Salvatore Rinaldi, glass in hand, entered the office of an influential councilman and left with a smile that smelled of agreement. The next day, the police made an elegant visit to the Caravetta truck routes. They found nothing but oranges and lessons, but the message was sent. Messing with someone else's sister is messing with your father's lunch. Lucia was now accompanied by a new maid, her eyes attentive, her step light. Vittorio, in turn, began to receive implicit messages, men in hats who swerved too late, dead telephones, letters with no return address. The city is an organism. When it wants to expel something, it produces a fever. And yet the love persisted. They saw each other at smaller intervals, made precious. A park bench under plane trees, a ruined balcony overlooking the harbor, an empty confessional where, ironically, they learned to confess without words. The touch had not yet come. The danger, yes. And time, which had always been an ally of discreet lovers, began to flow like loose dogs at dusk. "They're surrounding us," said Vittorio one of those afternoons next to a fountain. "Fences are straight, we are curve." Lucia wet her fingers, drop by drop, as if sealing an oath. The climate took its toll. The radio brought news from Rome. There was talk of change and modernity. But on the island, the century was always late. Salvatore demanded that Lucia stay home. She, sweetly, said she needed air. "The air is mine," said the brother. "The air is from the sea," she replied, and left. The secret was not discovered. It was delivered. On a saint's feast night, when the streets were filled with lights and promises, an envelope arrived in Salvatore's hands. There was no sender, but the paper smelled of incense and archival dust. Inside, black and white photographs of Lucia and Vittorio 2 feet apart, close to a destination. In one of them, the reflection in a window perfectly depicted the appearance of a kiss that never happened. Salvatore took the photos to his father. Old Rinaldi, who had seen more wars than marriages, remained silent. "The girl is good," he said finally. "Kindness drowns," replied the son. "The sea is ours," insisted the father. "Not today," returned Salvatore, and slammed the door. That same morning, Lucia was woken up by voices that didn't ask for permission. The room was filled with men and morale. A cousin asked quietly, to make it hurt more, "Was that all?" Or, Lucia didn't respond. Silence, for some men, is a confession. For her, it was a shield. Vittorio received the news from the priest, who had the red eyes of someone who doesn't sleep and the white courage of someone who fears. "Don't go there," pleaded the priest. He went. At the Rinaldi's gate, he found Salvatore with a smile that was humorless. "I came to talk to Lucia." Vittorio maintained the calm voice of those who have already made up their minds. "You came to talk to me." Salvatore signaled the men to retreat. "What do you want, Caravetta?" "What I can't buy." Vittorio raised his face. "Her hand." They laughed. They laughed with the hollow laughter of those who don't want to hear. Salvatore got too close, like those who need someone else's scent to hate better. "Do you want a wedding?" he whispered. "With my sister." "I want a life," Vittorio replied. It was then that Salvatore showed his humanity, in the crooked way of the proud. He didn't scream. It didn't hit. He just bowed his body, tired of being a guard for someone he loved. He lowered his voice. "My sister is not currency, but it's not an illusion either. What do you offer, Caravetta? My name, and my peace with yours. Silence. Families in Sicily weigh words as if they were sacks of grain. What was at stake was not just a romance, it was a geography. If Vittorio married Lucia, two worlds would touch not through the blood spilled, but through the blood offered. This hypothesis for some was heresy, for others an economy. The agreement did not come. Violence came. Days later, a police operation reached Caravetta warehouses with the precision of an internal map. Papers were seized, true, false, and ambiguous. Don Ernesto, sick, was taken to testify. The old man couldn't stand it, the hard bench and the direct light. It fell, rushed away. He did not return. Grief arrived like collectors arrive, without warning, but expected. At the wake, Lucia appeared covered in a short veil. Aunt Carmela opened the way. Vittorio wasn't crying. He was as dry as the floorboards. Lucia touched his shoulder briefly. It was the first touch. Nobody saw it, and those who saw it pretended not to. At the exit, Salvatore was waiting. I didn't bring insults, brought an ultimatum. Leave, he said in Vittorio's ear. Rome, Milan, the continent. Take your love. Let the island breathe. Vittorio looked at the sea, which that morning seemed like lead. He responded in the way of those who love without a strategy. I'll only leave if she comes with me. Lucia, in turn, faced her father with the sweetness of rebellion with no return. I will marry him, he said simply. You will marry the order, replied the old man. The order doesn't love me. The father raised his hand, not to hit, but to bless what he didn't approve of. May God have mercy on you, he murmured, and from me. The next morning, Lucia disappeared. It wasn't kidnapping. It was courage. A maid found a note on the dresser. I'm going where the sea changes its name and remains sea. Vittorio received another. If you are afraid, forgive me. I am not. Rome, September 1958. The world changed its appearance. In the windows, straight dresses. In cafes, French voices. In the streets, invisible listening. Lucia rented a room in Trastevere, where the clothes drying in the windows looked like the flags of invented countries. He wrote Vittorio an address. Waited. He didn't come. Not because he couldn't, Vittorio always could, but because a war started without shots. Caravetta territory was diluted. Men jumped fences. Favors became debts. Vittorio, who was created to fight without leaving his seat, had to stay. And staying for a man in love is the worst way to leave. Letters came and went. Some opened, others lost. Lucia worked in the same bookstore, now a Roman branch, cataloguing worlds that were not hers. At night, he wrote poems that were maps. The fragile woman that many imagined gave way to a firmness that only lonely women recognize. He didn't cry every day. He learned to cry only when the water could be washed away in the morning. Vittorio sent money that she never touched. He sent photographs of Casabianca, now with closed windows. He sent word that peace would come. Peace did not come. Time, yes, and with it, a longing that became discipline. 2 cups of coffee at the table, even if only one was drinkable. In Sicily, Vittorio did what men do when they lose their father in the north. He calculated. He entered into agreements that I would previously have called indecent, held hands that he despised, pushed opponents with the elegance of someone who doesn't want to get their sleeves dirty. He resisted attempts to settle accounts that were not about the roots, but about the woman. He protected Lucia's name with his own. He paid dearly, survived. Sometimes at the end of the afternoon, he would go up to the terrace of Casabianca and look at the sea, wondering if the wind, after crossing so much blue, still carried the scent of jasmine. There were no new photographs in the room. Vittorio was afraid that a portrait would become a cage. However, he kept a promise that he had never said out loud, to get married. Winter. The courier brought a different letter, thick paper, smell of good ink. The sender was not Lucia. He was a notary from Rome. Mr. Caravetta, appear at Via dei Coronari, such number, on such date, to discuss a matter of interest to you. Vittorio held the envelope to his nose like someone smelling freshly baked bread, decided to go. In the notary's office, a crooked painting was straightened by a meticulous secretary. The notary, a small man with wise eyes, offered water and distrust. He opened a folder and, with the same solemnity as one opens wills, revealed the unexpected. Lucia had proposed marriage. Not a plea, not just a romantic request. A civil contract, simple and direct, with a clause that was poetry. We married to disarm two armies. Is she here? Asked Vittorio without breathing. No. The notary smiled sideways. Miss Rinaldi travelled. He left this paper and this key. The key was small, bronze, with a number perforated. Via dei Coronari, a high-rise apartment overlooking rooftops. Vittorio climbed the stairs, breathing like someone carrying something fragile. Opened. The apartment smelled of books and clean clothes. On the table, an envelope with his name, the handwriting he had learned to recognize, firm, slanted. V. If you read this, it's because we've finally reached the same day. I was forced to leave for the north with my family, for reasons that you will understand better than I do. I didn't give you the address because love shouldn't be a target. However, I leave what I can. The key to the place where I will be found, at the altar. If you accept, the notary knows the rest. I don't ask you for courage, I know you have it. I only ask that you bring wind. L. Vittorio Fic, or a lot of time standing, like someone arriving at a port and needing to talk to the sea before disembarking. Then he ran down the stairs. The Lancia's wheels looked rounder than ever. The next morning I was back on the island. I needed to face the enemy and the ally, Salvatore. He found him on the balcony of a house overlooking orange groves. The rival, tired, had the look of someone who had already lost a war that no one announced. Vittorio was direct. I'm going to marry your sister, with or without me. Salvatore set down the glass. With your consent if you have it, with your opposition if you have it. The brother laughed, not in mockery, but in relief. I've been protecting your life from mine for 2 years, he said simply. I hate you less than I hate the idea of seeing you sad. Get married, Caravetta, but get married clean. Clean? Vittorio raised an eyebrow. The pact is this. Your marriage will be a truce. You make sure yours don't touch mine, I guarantee mine won't touch you. What if someone rings? Touch my name. And I cut it myself. There was a handshake that weighed more than gold. The sea that day decided to applaud the performance. It hit the rocks hard. The church of Santa Lucia was prepared without pomp. No big music, no crowd. The priest, an old friend of both houses, accepted with the kind of courage that God sometimes lends to men. Lucia arrived wearing a short veil and a simple dress, like someone who doesn't need flowers to make it spring. Vittorio wore a dark suit that didn't hide his hand, that was shaking slightly. The pews were occupied by those necessary. Aunt Carmela, 2 cousins, Lucia's maid, the notary, the priest, and Salvatore. There were no parents. There were absences, which are also presences. The mass took place with the slowness of certainty. When the words, I accept, finally found their way into the right mouth, a murmur went through the church, the sound cities make when something impossible happens. At the moment of signing, 2 side doors opened. Men entered. They weren't from the police, they were old allies of Don Ernesto, who believed that peace without blood is an offense to history. One of them, Antonino, showed on his face the scars that ambition leaves inside. He approached the altar with the step of someone who doesn't ask for permission. Don Ernesto wouldn't have allowed it, he said gravely, looking at the portrait of the saint as if it were a portrait of the old chief. You are selling our memory. Vittorio didn't back down. He placed his body half a step in front of Lucia, a small and definitive gesture. He spoke quietly like someone talking to fire. Our memory is not in deaths, Antonino. It's in the harvest. Harvests come from fear. Crops come from rain, and today it rained. There was enough tension to form a tragedy. Hands went to pistols that no one should have taken to church. The priest raised the chalice, not for liturgy, but as a shield. Salvatore then took the step he never thought he would take. He placed himself next to Vittorio, between him and the ancient men. Whoever touches him touches me, he said, and his voice came out clear. And whoever touches me touches my sister, and whoever touches my sister touches God. Antonino understood that the world had changed without asking for permission. Time had finally arrived on the island. He lowered the gun slowly. He looked at Lucia and saw that her courage was twofold, to stay and to forgive. He turned to leave. On the threshold, he still provoked, as if he needed to save his own honor from ridicule. What if peace doesn't work out? Then for the first time we will try again, replied Vittorio. The papers were signed, the rings exchanged. There was no rice rain. There were deep breaths. Upon leaving, the sky became clear in a way that only the Mediterranean knows. What no one saw, and this is where the surprising ending is based, was what happened in the sacristy. The notary was waiting with an extra folder. Lucia, who had written poems for when she forgot who she was, had also written the strategy for when love reminded her of who she wanted to be. There were in that envelope records of properties, roots, debts and favors that both families preferred to keep in the dark. Documents obtained not through malice but through intelligence and the network of booksellers, priests and women who listen. Lucia proposed an invisible agreement there, transferring over the course of a year part of the business to legal fronts, citrus cooperatives, contracts with Roman banks, real jobs. In return, support and silence for those who did not adapt. The truce would not just be a marriage, it would be a change of model. Vittorio signed. Salvatore signed. The notary kept the future on thick paper. "This is not romance," said Lucia seriously. "It's architecture." "And I," replied Vittorio, "was born to build with you." The rumor spread, ashamed of itself. Instead of blood, the city gained jobs. Instead of shots, contracts. It wasn't a miracle, it was work. There was resistance and attempts at sabotage. There was also a harvest unusual of oranges the following autumn. They say the earth responds when men learn not to scream. Lucia and Vittorio kept Casa Bianca open, windows wide open, curtains light. The dinner table had 2 cups as on days away. Now both were drinkable. Aunt Carmela laughed more. Salvatore, over time, discovered that protecting his sister was easier when she didn't need to be protected. Old Rinaldi, sick, sent a short letter. "The order I gave you was not love. Forgive your father." Lucia put the folded paper in her book of poems. At the port, children started playing at marriage, not war. The priest, always discreet, said that God likes it when men force him to witness what he always wanted: reconciliations. The notary bought a new painting and purposely hung it crooked. One afternoon, years later, Lucia found the notebook she had written when she was in rented rooms. There was a poem that ended like this: "If the sea changes its name and remains sea, may I change my life and remain me." She read it out loud. Vittorio, from the other room, recognized the song. He approached. He touched the back of her neck with the delicacy of one who is grateful. "It brought wind," he said, smiling. "And I brought a map," she replied. They went to the balcony, the sun slowly descending, painted the leaves copper. Below, workers left the warehouses in no hurry. The world was not perfect, but it finally had a rhythm that didn't hurt. The last light landed on Lucia's ring, and for a moment it seemed like the entire Mediterranean fit in that circle. Because love, when it learns the name of the wind, doesn't change direction, it changes destiny.